They posted the bounty 3 days after I buried my wife. $500 for the man who murdered Judge Harlan. My name, my face, my death warrant nailed to every wall in Stillwater. I didn't kill him, but 4 bounty hunters tracked me through the desert anyway. And somewhere between the rope and redemption, they started believing me. Some truths are worth more than gold. These lands know pain better than joy. Every mark in the sand tells a story, but folks rarely listen. I saw this tale with my own eyes, like the crackle of a fire at night. The shadows of the past don't leave. You'd best listen close. Out here, it's the only way to survive. The desert stretched endless and merciless under a sun that didn't forgive mistakes. Nathaniel Cross ran because running was the only mathematics that made sense when $500 decorated wanted posters with your face. His boots kicked up plumes of dust that hung in the scorching air like accusations, and his lungs burned with each ragged breath. Behind him, for riders closed the distance with the patience of men who knew exhaustion would do half their work. Cross stumbled into a narrow canyon, its red rock walls rising like the bars of a cell open to the sky. He pressed his back against stone that held the day's heat like a furnace, his hand moving to the empty holster at his hip. They'd taken his gun 2 days ago when he tried trading it for water at a settlement that wouldn't sell to a wanted man. Now he had nothing, no weapon, no water, no hope except the desperate mathematics of survival. The riders appeared at the canyon entrance, silhouetted against the white-hot sky. 4 of them, arranged in a line that blocked retreat. Cross recognized the formation, bounty hunters working together, splitting the reward but doubling their effectiveness. The lead rider was a woman. Her white-brimmed hat pulled low, but not low enough to hide the calculating intelligence in her eyes. Beside her rode a massive man whose shoulders seemed carved from the same stone as the canyon walls. To her left, a lean gunslinger sat his horse with the easy confidence of someone who'd never missed. And bringing up the rear, a younger man, barely 20, gripped his rifle with hands that trembled slightly. "Nathaniel Cross," the woman called, her voice carrying clear despite the distance. "You're wanted for the murder of Judge William Harlan. You can come peaceful, or we can bring you back draped over a saddle. Your choice makes no difference to the bounty." Cross raised his hand slowly, showing empty palms. "Didn't kill Harlan. Someone set me up to hang for a crime I didn't commit." The woman guided her horse forward, the others following in formation. As they drew closer, Cross could see her face, weathered by sun and hard years, but sharp with intelligence that went beyond simple manhunting. "Every man we bring in claims innocence," she said. "You'll have to do better than that." "My wife died 3 weeks ago," Cross said, his voice cracking despite his effort to keep it steady. "Fever took her slow. I buried her outside Stillwater, and while I was grieving at her grave, someone murdered Judge Harlan in his chambers. They used my gun, the one I'd left in my room at the boarding house. By the time I came back to town, the sheriff had a warrant and a mob ready to lynch me without trial." The massive rider shifted in his saddle. "If you're innocent, why run?" His voice was surprisingly gentle for someone his size. "Because Stillwater doesn't care about innocence," Cross replied. "They care about closure. Judge Harlan was loved. I was a stranger passing through. Perfect mathematics for hanging." The woman studied him with eyes that had seen too many lies to be easily fooled. "My name's Reeves. This is Marcus." She gestured to the massive man. "Cole, the gunslinger, and Danny." The young man with the rifle nodded nervously. "We've been hunting you for 3 days. You're good at covering tracks, but you made a mistake at the water station." Cross remembered. He paid a boy to fill his canteen from a well, and the boy had run straight to these hunters. Desperation made men sloppy. "Please," Cross said, and he hated the pleading in his voice. "I love my wife. I'm mourning her still. I wouldn't have killed anyone, especially not during." He couldn't finish. The words choked in his throat. Catherine dismounted with fluid grace, approaching Cross with one hand near her pistol. "Empty your pockets." Slowly, Cross complied, producing a folded handkerchief, $3 in coins, and a small tin locket. Catherine took the locket, opened it. Inside was a photograph of a woman, young, smiling, alive in a way that transcended the daguerreotype's limitations. "Your wife?" Catherine asked. "Sarah," Cross whispered. "We've been married 2 years. She was everything." Catherine's expression shifted minutely, not softening exactly, but considering. She turned to her companions. "Marcus, check his hands." The massive man dismounted and approached Cross, taking his hands with surprising gentleness. He examined the palms, the fingers, turning them in the harsh sunlight. "No powder burns," Marcus said finally. "No residue. If he fired a gun in the past 3 weeks, he's washed his hands raw enough to remove every trace." "I haven't fired a gun since before Sarah got sick," Cross said. "I wouldn't leave her side. The doctor can confirm. I was with her every moment until she died." Cole, the gunslinger, spoke for the first time. His voice carried the dust of too many trails. "Judge Harlan was killed with a Colt Peacemaker. Single shot to the head, close range. The kind of execution that speaks of personal hatred, not random violence." Cross's heart hammered. "I never met Judge Harlan. I had no reason to hate him." Catherine walked a slow circle around Cross, her boots crunching on the canyon's gravel floor. "Here's what doesn't make sense," she said. "A man grieving his wife doesn't have the presence of mind to plan and execute a murder. Grief consumes everything. I know that personally. So either you're lying about your grief, or someone wanted Harlan dead and needed a convenient scapegoat." "The latter," Cross said desperately. "I swear on Sarah's grave." Danny, the young hunter, finally spoke. His voice was thin and uncertain. "Mrs. Reeves, what if he's telling the truth? What if we bring in an innocent man?" Catherine didn't answer immediately. She stared at Cross with an intensity that felt like being weighed on scales that would determine life or death. Finally, she said, "We're taking you back to Stillwater, but we're not handing you to the mob. We're going to investigate your story. If you're lying, you hang. If you're telling the truth." She paused. "Then we find who killed Judge Harlan." Relief flooded through Cross so powerfully his knees nearly buckled. "Thank you. God, thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Catherine said coldly. "Marcus, bind his hands. We travel together until we know the truth." As Marcus wrapped rope around Cross's wrists, not tight enough to cut circulation, but secure enough to prevent escape, Cross felt the first glimmer of hope since Sarah's death. These bounty hunters weren't mindless killers chasing gold. They were something rare. People who still believed truth mattered more than reward. The sun continued its merciless descent toward evening, painting the canyon in shades of blood and amber. Catherine mounted her horse and gestured for Cross to share Marcus's mount. As they rode out of the canyon, Cross looked back at the narrow stone walls that had nearly become his tomb and silently promised Sarah that he would survive long enough to clear his name and mourn her properly. Ahead lay Stillwater, and the truth, whatever terrible shape it took. They rode into Stillwater as twilight transformed the settlement into a study in shadows and lamplight. The town was larger than Cross remembered. Prosperity had come from somewhere, evident in fresh-painted storefronts and the new courthouse that dominated the main square. But prosperity hadn't softened Stillwater's edges. Men watched from doorways with eyes that calculated violence, and women pulled their children inside when the bounty hunters passed. Catherine led them not to the sheriff's office, but to the boarding house where Cross had stayed before Sarah's death. The proprietor, a nervous man named Fletcher, blanched when he saw Cross bound and accompanied by armed hunters. "Mrs. Reeves," Fletcher stammered, wringing his hands. "I already told the sheriff everything I know." "Tell us," Catherine said, dismounting with the grace of someone who'd spent more time on horseback than on foot. "Start with the day Judge Harlan died." Fletcher glanced at Cross, then away, unable to meet his eyes. Mr. Cross here was staying in room 7. Had been for near a month while his wife took sick. The morning Judge Harlan died, Cross left early, said he was going to the cemetery to tend Sarah's grave. "What time?" Marcus asked, his deep voice making Fletcher jump. "Dawn. Maybe 5:30. Sun wasn't full up yet." "And his gun?" Cole prompted, his hand resting casually on his pistol. The one used to kill Harlan. Fletcher's face twisted with guilt. It was in his room. I saw it the day before when I brought fresh linens. Colt Peacemaker, lying on the bedside table. When the sheriff searched Cross's room after the murder, the gun was gone. Catherine's eyes narrowed. Who has access to the rooms? I do. My wife does. And Fletcher hesitated. And Catherine's voice carried an edge sharp enough to cut. And Deputy Morgan. He stays here sometimes when he's too drunk to ride home. I give him a key so he can sleep it off without disturbing paying guests. The name hung in the air like smoke. Catherine exchanged glances with Marcus, some unspoken communication passing between them. Where's Deputy Morgan now? Catherine asked. Sheriff's office, I expect. Or the saloon. He's usually one or the other. Catherine turned to Cross. Did you know Deputy Morgan? Cross shook his head. Saw him around town. Never spoke more than a greeting. Did he know your wife? The question struck Cross like a fist. What? No. Why would? He stopped, memories surfacing like something drowned finally breaking the surface. Wait, there was... Sarah mentioned once that a deputy had tried talking to her at the general store. Said he was persistent, made her uncomfortable. She didn't mention his name. Catherine's expression hardened. Marcus, stay with Cross. Cole, Danny are with me. We're going to have a conversation with Deputy Morgan. They found him in the Lucky Strike saloon, 3 whiskeys deep, and working on a 4th. Morgan was a lean man in his 30s, with the kind of handsome features that had probably charmed many women and fooled more men. He looked up as Catherine entered, his eyes moving to her companions, calculating odds and finding them unfavorable. Mrs. Reeves, he said, his voice carrying the slight slur of someone well-practiced at functioning drunk. Heard you brought a Nathaniel Cross. Sheriff's gonna be pleased. That reward money spent well in 4 ways. Catherine sat across from him without invitation. Tell me about Cross's gun, the one used to kill Judge Harlan. Morgan smiled didn't quite reach his eyes. What's to tell? Cross's weapon, Cross's crime. Simple mathematics. Except Cross was at the cemetery when Harlan died. Multiple witnesses confirm it. Witnesses lie. Morgan drained his whiskey, signaled for another, especially for strangers they feel sorry for. Cole leaned against the bar, his posture casual, but his eyes watchful. You have access to the boarding house rooms. You could have taken Cross's gun, killed Harlan, planted evidence. Morgan's hand moved toward his pistol, but Danny's rifle was already aimed at his chest. The young hunter's hands weren't shaking anymore. Careful, Catherine said softly. Assaulting bounty hunters in pursuit of truth is a federal offense. You really want to add that to whatever else you're carrying. Morgan's hand stilled. He laughed, but it sounded forced. You're chasing shadows. I got no reason to kill Judge Harlan. He was a good man. Was he? Catherine leaned forward. Or was he a problem? Someone who knew things you wanted buried. For just a moment, Morgan's mask slipped. Fear flashed across his face before he could suppress it. I don't know what you're talking about. Sarah Cross, Catherine said, watching Morgan's reaction. Beautiful woman, married to a stranger, vulnerable while her husband cared for her during her sickness. Did you try your luck, deputy? Did she reject you? Morgan stood abruptly, his chair scraping across the wooden floor. I'm done talking to you. You want to question me officially, go through the sheriff. We will, Catherine promised. But first, we're going to visit Judge Harlan's chambers. See what he was working on before someone put a bullet in his brain. They left Morgan in the saloon, his earlier confidence replaced by something darker. Outside, Cole turned to Catherine. You think Morgan killed Harlan? I think Morgan's scared, Catherine replied. Scared men do desperate things. And I think there's more to this than a simple murder. Harlan was investigating something, and Cross became convenient cover when Sarah died and left him vulnerable. The courthouse was locked, but Catherine had learned long ago that locks were suggestions rather than barriers. She picked it with tools produced from her coat pocket. and they slipped inside as full darkness claimed Stillwater. Harlan's chambers were undisturbed. The sheriff had apparently collected the body and evidence, but left everything else untouched. Catherine lit a lantern, casting warm light across the judge's desk. Papers covered the surface, legal documents, correspondence, and a leather-bound journal. Catherine opened the journal, scanning entries written in Harlan's careful hand. Most were mundane, case notes, observations about settlers' disputes. But 3 weeks before his death, the tone changed. Deputy Morgan brought me disturbing information about Sheriff Blackwood's land acquisitions. Claims the sheriff has been forcing settlers off valuable property through intimidation and violence, then filing claims under false names. If true, this corruption goes to the territory's highest levels. I've requested federal marshals investigate, but Morgan warns me to be careful, says Blackwood has killed to protect his empire. Catherine read the entry aloud, her companions listening with growing understanding. Harlan wasn't killed by Cross, Cole said. He was killed because he was about to expose Blackwood. And Morgan? Danny asked. Either Blackwood's accomplice, Catherine replied, or Blackwood himself silenced Harlan and framed Cross to stop the investigation. A sound outside, boots on the courthouse steps. Catherine extinguished the lantern instantly, and they moved to the shadows. The door opened, lamplight spilling in, revealing Sheriff Blackwood himself, his bulk filling the entrance. "I know you're in here, Mrs. Reeves," Blackwood said calmly. "Breaking into a judge's chambers. That's a crime, even for bounty hunters." Catherine stepped into the light, her hand near her pistol. "So is murder, Sheriff, especially when you kill a judge to hide your own corruption." Blackwood smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "Big accusations. You have proof." Catherine held up the journal. Harlan's own words. "He knew what you were doing. He called for federal investigation. You killed him and framed Cross to shut down the inquiry." "Harlan was killed with Cross's gun," Blackwood countered. "Simple evidence." "Evidence you planted," Cole said, emerging from shadow, using Morgan's access to the boarding house. Blackwood's smile vanished. His hand moved to his pistol, and suddenly the chamber was a frozen moment of violence, waiting to erupt. Catherine's hand was already on her weapon, Cole's hand hovering over his, Danny's rifle rising. "You can't kill all of us," Catherine said quietly. "And even if you could, Cross knows the truth now. So do we. Federal marshals are already en route. Harlan made sure of that before you murdered him. Your empire's collapsing, Blackwood. Surrender now, or die here." For a long moment, Blackwood stood motionless. Then his shoulders sagged, the fight draining from him like water from a cracked vessel. Morgan was supposed to make it look random, supposed to be quick and clean. "Nothing about murder is clean," Catherine replied. They'd bound Blackwood and walked him to his own jail, where Marcus waited with Cross. When Cross saw the sheriff in chains, understanding and relief flooded his face in equal measure. "You found proof," Cross breathed. "We found truth," Catherine corrected, "and we're making sure it's heard." The federal marshal arrived in Stillwater 3 days later, riding a dust-covered horse and carrying authority that transcended the local power structures that had ruled through corruption and fear. His name was Thomas Garrett, and he'd served as a marshal for 20 years across territories where law was still a concept being negotiated between violence and civilization. Catherine had sent word through telegraph, and Garrett had come quickly, bringing with him 2 deputies and the full weight of federal justice. They set up in the courthouse, ironically, in the same chambers where Judge Harlan had been murdered, and began taking testimony. Cross was the first witness, describing his wife's illness and death, his presence at the cemetery during Harlan's murder, and his panic when he'd realized someone had stolen his gun and framed him. Fletcher, the boarding house owner, testified about Deputy Morgan's access to the rooms and his frequent drunken stays. A doctor confirmed Cross had been constantly at Sarah's bedside during her final weeks, rarely leaving even for meals. And then Morgan himself was brought in, shackled and sullen. Under Garrett's methodical questioning, the The deputy's story began to crack like sun-baked earth. "Sheriff Blackwood paid you to kill Harlan?" Garrett asked, his voice deceptively gentle. "Blackwood didn't pay me nothing," Morgan replied. "He owned me. I owed him gambling debts, thousands of dollars. He said if I took care of the Harlan problem, we'd be square." "Take care," Garrett repeated, meaning murder. Morgan's defiance crumbled. "I didn't want to. Harlan was a good man, but Blackwood said if I refused, he'd frame me for the land grab scheme. Said I was in too deep already." "And Cross's gun?" "I knew Cross was at the cemetery every morning, grieving his wife. I took his gun from his room, used it on Harlan, then left it where the sheriff would find it. Planted evidence in Cross's room. Letters I forged making it look like Cross blamed Harlan for Sarah's death, like some sickness in his head made him connect her fever to the judge's court decisions." Cross, listening from the gallery, felt sick. His grief had been weaponized, turned into motive for a crime he'd never conceived. Catherine stood and addressed the marshal. "Morgan's testimony confirms what we found in Harlan's journal. Blackwood has been running a criminal enterprise, forcing settlers off valuable land, filing false claims, building an empire on theft and violence. Harlan discovered it and was going to expose him. Cross became the perfect scapegoat because his grief made him vulnerable and isolated." Garrett reviewed the evidence: Harlan's journal, testimony from settlers who'd been forced off their land, financial records Catherine's team had uncovered showing Blackwood owned property under a dozen false names. "Sheriff Blackwood," Garrett said, turning to where Blackwood sat in chains, "you're charged with murder, conspiracy to murder, fraud, and corruption of office. You'll be transported to the territorial capital for trial. Given the evidence, I expect you'll hang." Blackwood said nothing. His empire had crumbled in less than a week, brought down not by armies or politics, but by the persistence of 4 bounty hunters who'd chosen truth over easy money. Garrett turned to Cross. "Mr. Cross, all charges against you are dismissed. You're free to go. I'm sorry for what you've endured." Cross stood on shaking legs. Freedom felt surreal after days of expecting death. "Thank you. And thank you," he said to Catherine and her team. "You could have just brought me in for the reward. You risked your lives instead." Catherine met his eyes. "Some things matter more than money. We learned that the hard way." That night, Stillwater held a strange celebration, relief mixing with shame, the town recognizing how close it had come to hanging an innocent man. Cross stood at the edge of the gathering, unable to join the festivities. His wife was still dead. His grief remained raw and consuming. Catherine found him on the boarding house porch, staring at stars that seemed impossibly distant and cold. "You're leaving," she said. It wasn't a question. "Nothing for me here," Cross replied. "Sarah's buried outside town. I'll visit her grave, say goodbye properly, and then, I don't know, somewhere that doesn't carry these memories." Catherine sat beside him, her own memories evident in the lines around her eyes. "I lost someone too, years ago. My husband was killed by men who wanted our land. I became a bounty hunter because I thought bringing justice to others would somehow balance the injustice done to me. Does it? No, but it gives me purpose. Keeps me moving forward instead of drowning in what was lost." Cross considered her words. "You saved my life. I owe you more than I can repay. You owe me nothing, but if you want to give something." Catherine pulled out a piece of paper, handed it to Cross. "There's a settlement 2 territories east. They're looking for a school teacher. Your wife was a teacher before you married, wasn't she?" Cross stared at the paper, surprised. "How did you know?" "I pay attention, and I think Sarah would want you to honor her memory by helping others learn, by building something instead of just surviving." Tears blurred Cross's vision. "Thank you." Catherine stood, adjusted her hat. "My team's moving on tomorrow. There's another bounty, another chase. But Cross, remember that innocence is worth fighting for, even when the whole world says otherwise." She walked away, leaving Cross alone with his grief and the first fragile sense that perhaps survival wasn't the only option. Perhaps, eventually, he could learn to live again. Catherine's team made camp 3 miles outside Stillwater, unwilling to spend another night in a town that had nearly participated in judicial murder. They'd collected their fee, not the bounty on Cross, but payment from Marshall Garrett for assistance in uncovering Blackwood's corruption. It was less money than the original reward, but it came without the stain of bringing in an innocent man. Marcus tended the fire, while Danny cleaned weapons and Cole studied a new wanted poster that had arrived via courier. Catherine sat apart, writing in a leather journal she'd kept for years, a record of hunts, lessons learned, people saved or failed. "You think Cross will make it?" Danny asked, his young voice carrying concern that reminded Catherine why she'd taken him on despite his inexperience. "He's got a chance," Catherine replied without looking up from her writing. "Grief doesn't kill quick. It's slow poison. But if he finds purpose, teaching like his wife did, he might transmute the pain into something useful." Marcus poked the fire, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. "We almost brought him in, almost handed an innocent man to a mob. But we didn't," Cole said firmly. "We questioned. We investigated. We chose hard truth over easy money." "This time," Marcus countered. "What about next time? What if next time we're wrong?" The question hung heavy in the smoke-scented air. Catherine closed her journal and looked at her team. 3 people who'd been strangers before bounty hunting, now bound by shared purpose and the weight of choices made in pursuit of dangerous men. "We're not perfect," Catherine said. "We're going to make mistakes. Maybe we already have. But what separates us from Blackwood, from Morgan, from every corrupt lawman we've encountered? We care about truth. We're willing to risk reward money, risk our lives, risk being wrong, if it means innocent people don't hang." She stood, moved to the fire's warmth. "When I started this work, it was pure vengeance. I wanted every killer brought to justice, because I couldn't bring justice to the man who killed my husband. But you 3, you've taught me something. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about protecting the vulnerable, about standing between power and innocence." Danny looked up from the rifle he was cleaning. "Mrs. Reeves, why'd you really take me on? I'm not fast like Cole, not strong like Marcus. I'm barely useful." "You're useful because you ask questions," Catherine replied. "Because when I was ready to bring Cross in for easy money, you asked, what if he's innocent?" That question saved a man's life, Danny. Never underestimate the power of doubt in service of truth. Cole unfolded the new wanted poster, holding it toward the firelight. The face sketched there belonged to a man in his 40s, scarred and mean-looking. The name beneath read Jacob Ferris, wanted for murder and robbery, $750 reward. "Next hunt," Cole said. "Ferris killed a family in the Northern Territories, stole their land deed and their savings. 3 children orphaned." Catherine took the poster, studied it. "What do we know about him?" "Fast draw, no conscience, leaves bodies wherever he goes." Cole's voice carried the flat certainty of someone who'd researched their target thoroughly. "But here's the thing. Some witnesses say Ferris had a partner, someone who planned the jobs while Ferris executed them. Meaning Ferris might be guilty, or might be like Cross, taking blame for someone else's crime," Marcus observed. "Exactly," Catherine said. "So we don't just hunt Ferris. We hunt truth. We find him, we question him, we investigate before we hand him to justice." "That's a harder way to work," Cole noted. "Most bounty hunters don't bother with investigation." "Most bounty hunters don't sleep well," Catherine replied. "I prefer my conscience clear and my sleep undisturbed." They spent the rest of the evening planning the Ferris hunt, routes he might have taken, associates who might shelter him, towns where a man with stolen money might spend it. By the time they turned in for the night, they had a strategy that balanced pursuit with prudence. As Catherine lay in her bedroll, staring up at stars that had witnessed countless injustices across the territories, she thought about the strange path that had brought her here, from grieving widow to bounty hunter, from vengeance seeker to someone who fought for truth even when it cost more than lies. Tomorrow they would ride north, following Ferris's trail into territories where law was still being written in blood and compromise. They would face danger, deception, and the constant risk that came with challenging powerful men who viewed human life as currency to be spent. But they would do it together, and they would do it right. That was the hunter's creed Catherine had forged through years of hard lessons and harder choices. Truth over gold, justice over expedience, innocence protected, even at the cost of personal fortune. It was a creed that would be tested again and again in the unforgiving mathematics of the West. But it was a creed worth dying for, because some things, honor, integrity, the life of an innocent man, were worth more than any bounty ever posted. The weeks following became Catherine's test of whether justice could outlive vengeance. The federal investigation expanded, uncovering Blackwood's network of corruption that stretched across 3 territories. Judges, land office clerks, even a territorial senator, all bought and paid for with gold from homesteads stolen through murder and intimidation. Cross testified at 7 different hearings, each time reliving the days after Sarah's death, each time explaining how he became the perfect scapegoat. His grief was weaponized as evidence of his transformation into a justice crusader, no longer a convenient suspect, but a symbol of how easily the system could be manipulated by powerful men. Catherine's team continued their circuit, but everything felt different now. Danny had lost his nervous trembling, replaced by quiet confidence. Marcus had stopped apologizing for his size and started using it deliberately, positioning himself between threats and victims. Cole smiled more, the hard edges of his cynicism worn smooth by proof that sometimes the fight was worth fighting. And Catherine herself felt a shift, the exhaustion that had driven her for years transforming into something sustainable. Purpose instead of obsession, justice instead of revenge. They took a bounty in Silver Mesa, tracking a rustler who'd killed a ranch family. But this time, when they caught him, Catherine didn't just deliver him to the nearest sheriff. She investigated first, discovered he'd been framed by the actual killer, and spent 2 additional weeks proving it. The real murderer hanged. The innocent man walked free. You're changing the game, a territorial judge told her after that case. Most bounty hunters care about collection speed, not accuracy. You're building something different, a reputation for truth. Truth pays better in the long run, Catherine replied. But privately, she knew it wasn't about payment anymore. It was about sleep, about looking in mirrors without flinching, about carrying the weight of choices she could defend rather than decisions that haunted. The letter from Cross arrived in December, delivered to a trading post where Catherine had left forwarding instructions. His handwriting was careful, educated. Sarah had taught school before their marriage, and she taught her husband too. Mrs. Reeves, I wanted you to know I've taken the teaching position you recommended. The settlement is small but growing, and the children are eager despite their rough circumstances. Every day I stand before them, I think of Sarah and what she would have wanted me to do with the second life you gave me. The trial of Blackwood's co-conspirators concluded last week. 7 men convicted, 3 hanged for imprisoned. It's not enough. It will never be enough, but it's something. The judge mentioned your testimony as critical evidence. You have my eternal gratitude. More importantly, I want to tell you about a student named Mary. She's 8, recently orphaned when her parents died of fever. She reminds me of Sarah at that age, fierce, bright, determined. I've been teaching her to read and write, and watching her discover books is like watching Sarah live again through someone else's joy. You told me survival wasn't the only option. You were right. I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm living, building, honoring Sarah's memory by doing what she loved, teaching children that the world is bigger than their current circumstances, that words and numbers can open doors they didn't know existed. Thank you for giving me the chance to discover that. Thank you for believing truth mattered more than easy money. Thank you for being the kind of person who makes the world slightly less broken. With respect and gratitude, Nathaniel Cross. Catherine read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and placed it in her journal beside Elijah's drawing of the gunfighter surrounded by invisible companions. 2 pieces of evidence that the work mattered, that choices had consequences beyond the immediate moment. Good news, Marcus asked, noticing the softness in her expression. Confirmation, Catherine replied, that we're doing this right. They were camped outside Redemption Falls, ironic name, given their recent history, tracking a claim jumper who'd murdered a prospector for a silver strike. The wanted poster promised $400. Catherine had insisted on 3 days of investigation first, verifying the man was actually guilty before they brought him in. Old habits die hard, but new habits were taking root. Justice over speed, truth over assumption, the kind of bounty hunting that might actually change the profession rather than just participating in its worst tendencies. On their 4th week, they encountered another bounty hunter, a man named Silas Black who'd been working the territories for 20 years with a reputation for brutality and efficiency. He tracked the same claim jumper to a mining camp and was preparing to take him by force. Audience and evidence be damned. Catherine intercepted him at the camp entrance. We need to verify he's guilty first. Black laughed, a sound like gravel in a bucket. The poster says wanted dead or alive. I choose dead. Simpler. And if he's innocent? If someone framed him, like they tried to frame Nathaniel Cross? Black spat tobacco juice that barely missed Catherine's boot. Innocent, guilty. Makes no difference to me. I collect bounties, not verdicts. Then you're in the wrong profession, Cole said, stepping beside Catherine with his hand near his pistol. We're taking this one. You can walk away, or we can settle this another way. The standoff lasted 10 seconds, Black calculating odds, reading the determination in 4 sets of eyes, recognizing that some fights weren't worth the cost. You're making this business complicated, he said finally, mounting his horse. We're making it honest, Catherine corrected. There's a difference. After he left, they spent 2 days investigating the claimed jumper. Found witnesses who confirmed he'd discovered the silver legitimately. Found evidence that the actual murderer was the man who'd filed the accusation, a claim office clerk who wanted the strike for himself. They brought in the real killer, cleared the innocent man's name, collected no bounty because the false accusation meant there was no valid warrant. 4 days of work for nothing but the satisfaction of getting it right. We're going to starve, Danny observed, counting their dwindling funds. Probably, Catherine agreed, but we'll starve with clear consciences. Except they didn't starve. Word spread about the bounty hunters who actually investigated, who brought in the right suspects, who cared about truth. Clients started seeking them out specifically. Families who wanted justice, not just closure. Towns tired of corrupt sheriffs, delivering convenient suspects. Judges who needed evidence they could trust. The work changed, became more investigative, more deliberate, more meaningful. The money came slower, but felt cleaner. And the reputation they built, Catherine's crew, people started calling them. Opened doors that simple bounty hunting never could. Sarah sent Catherine a package in February. Inside was a dress, simple but well-made, the kind a teacher's wife might wear to church, and a note, for the woman who gave me back my life. Wear it to something joyful. Catherine held the dress, feeling its weight, its promise. She'd spent years in trail-worn clothes, living rough, avoiding anything that suggested softness or vulnerability. But looking at this dress, she saw possibility, not of abandoning her work, but of being more than just the work, of having a life that included joy alongside justice. She wore it to Easter service in Silver Creek, standing in a church for the first time in 5 years. The hymns washed over her, familiar and strange, reminding her of the woman she'd been before her husband's death, someone who believed the world could be good, who saw beauty alongside brutality. Marcus stood beside her, his deep voice rumbling the bass notes. Cole fidgeted with the hymnal, uncomfortable in surroundings that demanded vulnerability. Danny sang off-key, but enthusiastic, young face bright with the simple pleasure of community. And Catherine felt something crack open inside her chest, the armor she'd worn for so long developing a fissure that let in light. After the service, an older woman approached. "You're Catherine Reeves, the bounty hunter who saved that schoolteacher." "I am. My son was murdered 3 years ago. The man who did it walked free because he had money and connections." The woman's eyes held desperate hope. "Could you help?" Could you find the truth? Catherine looked at her team, at Marcus's gentle strength, Cole's hard-won wisdom, Danny's eager determination. Looked at the dress Sarah had sent, at the journal filled with letters and drawings from people whose lives they'd touched. Yes, she said, we can help. Because that was what they did now. Not just hunt bounties, but hunt truth. Not just deliver suspects, but deliver justice that actually meant something. The work would never be finished. Corruption would keep sprouting like weeds in untended gardens. Innocent people would keep needing defenders. The powerful would keep trying to write their own versions of justice. But Catherine and her crew would keep fighting, keep investigating, keep choosing truth over convenience, justice over profit, the hard right over the easy wrong. It wouldn't save everyone, wouldn't fix every broken thing, but it would matter. And in the end, that was enough. 5 years after Redemption Valley, Catherine Reeves sat in a federal courthouse in Denver, testifying before a commission investigating corruption in territorial law enforcement. Her journal, now 5 volumes thick, sat on the table before her, filled with documented cases of injustice, fraud, and the slow, difficult work of making things right. The commission had been formed after Catherine's investigations uncovered a network of corrupt officials spanning 3 territories. Her meticulous documentation, her testimonies, her willingness to fight for years through legal channels and public pressure had finally forced the federal government to act. Mrs. Reeves, the lead commissioner asked, in your professional opinion, can the bounty system be reformed, or should it be abolished entirely? Catherine considered the question carefully. Reformed. The system has value. It brings in dangerous criminals that understaffed law enforcement can't pursue. But it needs oversight, licensing requirements, mandatory investigation before collection, penalties for bringing in innocent people. You're proposing regulating an industry that's always operated on frontier justice. I'm proposing we stop calling it justice when it's just business, Catherine replied. Justice requires truth. Truth requires investigation. Investigation requires time and care. The current system rewards speed over accuracy, and innocent people pay the price. She thought of Nathaniel Cross, of the other cases they'd worked, of the countless near misses, where only their intervention had prevented tragedy. The frontier is closing. Catherine continued. Towns are growing. Law is spreading. We can't keep operating like it's 1850 when it's 1895. The bounty system needs to evolve, or it becomes just another tool for the powerful to oppress the vulnerable. The commissioners exchanged glances. You've submitted a detailed proposal for reform. If implemented, it would fundamentally change how bounty hunting operates. Good, Catherine said simply. The reforms passed 6 months later. Not everything Catherine had proposed, but enough. Licensing boards, mandatory evidence review, federal oversight, penalties for false captures. It wouldn't eliminate corruption. Nothing could do that entirely. But it would make corruption harder, more expensive, more likely to be caught and punished. Catherine returned to her crew with the news. They were in Wyoming now, investigating a case of cattle rustling that had too many convenient coincidences. Marcus had gone gray at the temples. Cole had finally settled down with a widow who ran a boarding house. Danny, now 32, was training his own apprentice, a young woman named Sarah, named after the teacher who'd inspired Catherine's transformation. We did it, Catherine told them, showing the commission's report. The reforms passed. Marcus smiled, the expression lighting his weathered face. Will it change things? It already has, Catherine replied, thinking of the dozen other investigative bounty crews that had formed, inspired by their example. Thinking of the towns that now required evidence before accepting bounty claims. Thinking of the children who'd grow up in a West slightly more just than the one their parents had known. A letter arrived that evening, forwarded from 3 previous addresses before finding Catherine in Wyoming. The handwriting was familiar. Nathaniel Cross, now running a school in Oklahoma Territory. Mrs. Reeves, I'm writing to tell you about Mary, the student I mentioned years ago. She's 16 now, preparing to take the teaching examination. She wants to follow in Sarah's footsteps, and in mine, though I'm hardly worthy of emulation. But more importantly, I'm writing to tell you about the change I see in this territory. Children asking questions about justice. Communities demanding evidence before convictions. A slower, more careful approach to law that values truth over expedience. I don't know if that's your influence spreading, or simply the natural evolution of civilization. But I'd like to think that what you started in Redemption Valley, the simple insistence that truth matters more than convenience, is taking root. Mary asked me yesterday why I became a teacher instead of seeking revenge against the men who framed me. I told her about you, about the bounty hunters who chose investigation over assumption, about how sometimes the hardest thing is to pause, to question, to seek truth even when lies are easier. She's writing her teaching thesis on justice in frontier education. I've given her your letters and your story as primary sources. The next generation, learning from our mistakes and your corrections. That feels like legacy. With continued gratitude, Nathaniel Cross. Catherine read the letter aloud to her team as they sat around the campfire, Wyoming stars brilliant overhead. When she finished, silence settled, comfortable, contemplative, the kind that came from shared purpose and mutual respect. We changed things, Danny said finally, his voice carrying wonder. Not just the cases we worked, but the whole system. Slightly, Catherine corrected. We changed it slightly. There's still corruption, still injustice, still people who value profit over truth. But we made it harder for them, made it more likely they'd be caught. Cole poked the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the night. So what now? We've reformed the system, trained the next generation. Do we retire? Settle down? Catherine looked at the stars, at the vast darkness punctuated by light, and thought about all the places that still needed someone to stand between the innocent and the wolves. One more case, she said, the cattle rustling. Then we'll see. But they all knew the truth. There would always be one more case. One more person who needed defending. One more corruption that needed exposing. The work was never finished, because human nature was never perfected. But it mattered. Every investigation mattered. Every truth uncovered mattered. Every innocent person saved from injustice mattered. That was the legacy. Not the reforms, or the reputation, or the letters of gratitude, though those had value. The legacy was the simple, stubborn insistence that truth was worth fighting for, that justice required effort, that some things mattered more than money or convenience, or the easy answer. Catherine Reeves had started as a bounty hunter seeking revenge, had become an investigator seeking justice, and had ended as something rarer, a woman who changed her profession from the inside, who proved that even in the brutal arithmetic of the frontier, truth could be valued above profit. She didn't live to see the full flowering of the reforms she'd fought for. None of them did. Marcus died at 62, Cole at 68, Danny at 71. But by the time Catherine passed at 74, the West had transformed. Bounty hunting had become a licensed profession with standards and oversight. Investigative techniques she'd pioneered were taught in law enforcement academies. The cases she documented became textbooks for a new generation of lawmen who understood that justice required more than just a gun and a warrant. And in a small school in Oklahoma, a teacher named Mary Cross taught her students about the woman who'd saved her mentor's life by believing that truth mattered more than convenience. The frontier closed. The wild became tamed. But the principles Catherine had fought for, truth, investigation, justice that valued accuracy over speed, those endured. Not perfectly, never perfectly, but enough. In the end, that was all anyone could ask for. To make things slightly better. To fight for truth slightly harder. To leave the world slightly more just than you found it. Catherine Reeves had done that. And the invisible army that followed behind her. All the lives she'd touched, all the people she'd saved, all the students who learned from her example, carried that legacy forward into a future she'd helped make possible. Some debts can only be paid with truth. Catherine had spent her life paying that debt, over and over, case after case, truth by hard-won truth. And in paying it, she'd proven that one person, determined and stubborn, and refusing to accept easy lies, could change not just individual lives, but entire systems. That was justice. That was legacy. That was enough. See you around, my friend. I've got another story for you.